Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Project Management Guru series delivered by the Project Management Guru. I want us to continue in our project management work, and today I want to talk to you about strategic project planning, how to plan a project strategically. If you recollect, just a couple of days back, I was telling you that we jump too quickly into detailed planning without looking at a project strategically. It's one of the common mistakes in project planning. So today I want to talk to you about, or describe to you, or express to you, or show you how to plan a project strategically. You must always have a strategy for your project before you talk of detailed planning. You and your project team must sit down and think strategically as to how this project is going to be handled. I told you a project is unique. Each project presents you with different challenges, risks, and constraints, and different circumstances. So you cannot use the same ideas that you use for one project for another project. You must have a strategy for every project that comes your way. And you must have that strategic plan before you go into the detailed nitty-gritties or detailed planning of the project. If you attend my weekend courses, I'll go into detail with you about this strategic planning of projects, and we might even work some examples. But before I start this strategic planning process, once again, I want to talk about project planning in general. That the seeds of problems that you see today in your projects were actually sown at the planning stage. So planning is very, very important. And you need to really have time for planning and plan and plan and plan and make sure that your project is well planned before you start execution. The initial planning is the most vital part of the project. And it's very important that you allocate enough time and effort at planning your project. And research has proven to us that the effort you put in at pre-planning of a project, more or less gives you a better chance of winning on your project. So back to my strategic project planning. How do you go about it? As I keep emphasizing, you have to do the strategic project planning first before you go into detailed planning. Don't jump too quickly into detailed planning without getting the strategy right. So first of all, what is a project strategy? As I keep emphasizing, a project is like going to war. And you, the project manager, you are the war general. And you must think through this war that is coming up and come up with a winning, foolproof, agile strategy to win the war. You might have heard of the word strategy, but maybe this lesson or this video might give you an insight into what strategy is. The way you plan projects from the beginning, your initial planning will determine the results of the project. You need to start smart. Use the right process, use the right people in the planning, and build a winning, foolproof strategy. That's your goal. Now, the question I want to ask you is your project strategic? That's one thing you need to be clear with before you start this whole strategic planning process. Does your project has a strategic value? Has it got a strategic intent? What I'm saying is that, is your project aligned to the overall organizational strategy? Or your project is just out of the blue, just came in without any alignment to any organizational strategy? And you have to make sure that your project is strategic, is part of the organizational strategy that has been promulgated by the project organization. So those of you in government departments or other private departments, first of all, consult your strategic plan, the organizational strategic plan. Normally they prepare it annually, and check whether your project is strategic, whether it has a strategic intent, whether it's part of the overall organizational strategy. That's the first thing you have to do. To emphasize on this strategic intent, there is this adage that goes that good project managers are focused on the successful execution of their projects. But excellent project managers are good project managers who understand how their project fits into strategy, and they make decisions that ensure benefit realization. So the only advice I'm giving you here is, or the key lesson here is, project manager, you must be strategic. You must think strategically in the execution of the project. And I'll teach you how to do that. Okay. Let's look at the organizational strategic plan. This is out of your control. Sometimes you are part of it, sometimes you are not. It's a document that is given to you. Just go into that document and see if you can locate your project and see how your project fits into the organizational strategic plan. This is what tells you that your project is strategic, or it has strategic intent. Developing a strategy is thinking big. That's what it means. Thinking out of the box is out of the box thinking. Einstein said we cannot solve problems with the same ideas or the same kind of thinking used when the problems were created. Strategic thinking means going into deeper thought about what you have been given to do about this project. It's big picture thinking. And you need to put on your thinking gear and start thinking big about this project. So, strategic project management approach is the application of strategic thinking to project management. It's a high-level plan which you must develop before you even start thinking of detailed planning of any aspect of the project. It provides a common focus for you and the project team. So please, it's important that please you have a strategy. And the strategic project planning process, first of all, starts with developing the strategic plan. You must have the strategic project plan. And then first of all, you must make sure that your plan is aligned. Your strategic project plan that you have developed is aligned. It's aligned to the overall organizational strategy. Then the next step two is that your project, the strategic project plan must be agile. You must have strategic project plan agility, a foolproof plan, even though sometimes it's impossible, but your plan must be agile because things are going to change. along the way. Conditions are going to change. So you must have an agile project strategy. Then the last thing you do is implementing the strategy, implementing the strategic plan. And you need to recruit the right people who understand the strategy to implement this strategy. And you must have ways of monitoring the strategy, periodic evaluation of the strategy to check whether the strategy is actually working. And if it's not working, feel free. So first of all, in project management, you start with the project strategic plan. You must have a strategy for every aspect of the PMBOK area. You must have a strategy for time management, a strategy for cost management, a strategy for scope, a strategy for communications, a strategy for all the 10 PMBOK areas of a project management. That's exactly what you have to do. Then it is after these strategic plans that you start developing your detailed plan. Your detailed plan is how, who, when, and cost. So before you start thinking of how am I going to do this project, who will do it, when will it be done, and the cost, you have to first of all have a strategy. Okay. Let's move on. Okay. Developing a strategy starts with the organizational goals. Definitely the project belongs to a certain organization or whoever the client is, and they have an overall goal. So what you have to do is that look out for that goal. What is the overall project organizational goal? Okay, and understand that goal. Okay, now the next step is you do what we call project environmental analysis. You have to analyze the project environment. And remember, the project has two environments. There is the internal environment and there is the external environment. You have to go into these two environments and find out the strengths, the constraints, opportunities, and threats within these two environments. It's very important that you do this. And this is what escapes a lot of project managers. This is the area where when you ignore, it will actually hit you down the line on a project. The project environment. Remember, your project is not in a vacuum. Your project is within an environment. And the environment is going to have an impact on your project. There are things that are outside your control which will have an effect on the performance of your project. So please analyze your environment. The internal environment I'm talking about is the project organization, where the project is domiciled. There are certain factors which are going to present a challenge. Some of them will give you opportunities, some will give you constraints. Try and analyze all these factors within the project internal environment. For instance, resource availability. Do you have resources within this project organization to do this work? You must identify this. That's one area you must look out for and come out with the strengths, the constraints, the weaknesses, and the threats to resources. The organizational processes. That's also another area you need to look at. It's part of the internal environment of the project. Are these processes going to enhance the achievement of the project or the execution of the project? Is the organization project management matured enough? Do they have project management templates or project management methodologies that help in the execution of projects? These are things you must look at in the internal environment. Do they have a knowledge base about their projects? Do they have standards and policies? What does the standards and policies say? What are the weaknesses in these policies? What are the opportunities in these policies? What are the strengths and the threats in these policies to your project? Information archives about projects. You must go into all this and do SWOT analysis in all these areas. Then the project too has an external environment. That is things outside the project organization. So some of them is the socio-cultural environment of the project, the financial environment, the economy, interest rates, prices, the legal, the regulatory environment within which this project is being executed, the economic environment, the environmental, the market conditions, competitiveness, the political environment, the technological environment, and also health and safety regulations within this external environment. You need to look at all this strategically and come up with the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from this kind of environmental factors that I've mentioned to you in the external environment, and see how they can affect your project. So strategic project plan development is like thinking through the project and finding out the challenges, the weaknesses or the constraints, opportunities, the opportunities in these two environments I've highlighted to you, and the risk, or what we call the threats, that these things can present to your project. And you need to list them all with your project team. You may not be able to see all of them, but at least think through and get them listed. After you've scanned the project environment and you've seen the weaknesses and the threats and the opportunities and the risk and so on in the project environment, now you need to sit down with your project team and come out with a smart project delivery approach. Now that we know what is happening in our project environment, both the internal and external, we've seen the challenges, we've seen the constraints, we've seen whatever is in this environment. You now have to sit down with your team and come up with a smart project delivery approach, or what we call a smart project delivery strategy. So let your team members and yourself come up with strategic ideas that will actually, you see, you already have the opportunities. You've identified opportunities, you've identified constraints. So let them give you strategic ideas that will mitigate these constraints that you've identified in the environment. Let them give you strategic approaches or strategic ideas that will help you mitigate the risk that you've identified in the environment. So you come up with a resolution, a very smart resolution with your team, that in the case of this project, this is how we are going to do it. For instance, let me give you a typical example. You scan the environment of a project. Let's say you visit a site and you realize that the client already has got some occupation on the land or the occupation on the site. He's got some things there. Maybe he's got some containers that are located at the site. Okay? So that tells you that you already have a constraint right from day one. That is the project environment. You have a constraint. There are certain areas you have to wait. This alone should tell you that the execution of this project, it means you have to start from another site and wait for these containers to be evacuated before you move. This is what I'm talking about as strategy. Coming up with ideas that will mitigate the constraints that you find in the environment, or coming up with ideas that will enhance the opportunities that you've identified in the environment. For instance, if you realize in your project environment, there's a lot of excess labor in your project environment. One of the strategic ideas you could promulgate as a strategy is, let's use labor-intensive methods. That's a strategy. It came from the environment because of what you saw in the environment. Okay, so after having these strategic ideas, it could be several of them, you know. And then once you have these strategic ideas, you develop strategic objectives out of it. You develop strategic objectives out of all these strategic ideas that you got from the environment. Strategic ideas as to how you are going to deliver this project, and then you come up with strategic objectives for each idea. And then from the objective, you develop your strategic outcomes or deliverables that will come out of these objectives. And then for each deliverable, you now do detailed planning for each deliverable. This is where the detailed planning starts. This is so for each deliverable, you now have to find out how are we going to achieve it. And this is where the Gantt charts and all those softwares and things come in. So it's very important that you follow this approach in the development of your strategy. Then after having the strategy, the next thing you should be thinking of is the agility of the strategy. We call it strategic project plan agility. Is your project plan agile? Agile means, you know, the ability of your strategy to withstand the environment, the environmental forces. You started with some assumptions on this project. That is, things which must be there before you start this project. Or we call it must exist preconditions. These are assumptions that you started with. What you have to do is you have to actually analyze these assumptions and test their validity. And if they are valid assumptions, make sure you protect them so that they can enhance the continuous or the smooth execution of the project. So you have to look at your assumptions and act on them. Try and protect those assumptions and make sure they are available. Those assumptions actually happen. If those assumptions are not feasible, remove it out of the strategic equation and look for assumptions that are feasible. For instance, the client promised that they are going to provide support, technical support to this project. That's an assumption you are starting with. Fine, you must make sure you protect this assumption so that it will continue to be there to enhance the development of the project. Another thing you must look at to make your project agile is also the risk factors. There are things that are going to disrupt your strategy. Some of these assumptions are going to change. They will change in a very surprising manner. You have to come up with a plan, a contingency plan. That what if scenarios, what are you going to do? So considering the assumptions and the risk factors, this is how you make your strategy agile. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how you develop a strategic project plan for your project. It starts with the overall strategic objectives of the organization or the strategic goals of the organization. You do a project environmental scan. You do a SWOT analysis of the project environment, both internal and external. Then you come up with smart strategic ideas as to how to overcome this project environment. Very smart strategic ideas. And just as I'm indicating to you from the beginning, don't do this alone. Do it with your project team. People will give you wonderful ideas as to how to overcome some of the constraints the weaknesses, the risk that you've identified in your project environment. And then you come up with strategic, smart ideas as to how to overcome these things. And then you develop them into objectives and then deliverables. And then it is after this that the detailed planning of the project could begin. This is how you go about developing a strategy. And once after you finish this strategy, make sure your strategy is agile by considering the assumptions that you started with, whether they are feasible assumptions, whether there are things that can really happen. How, for instance, the pre-existing conditions that you assumed was going to happen. Factor them into your strategy. And also risk that you saw in your project environment. Factor them into your strategy to make your strategy more agile. Agile means your strategy is foolproof, is able to resist the environmental forces. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you develop a strategy. And it doesn't end there. After having your strategy, you must find a performance management system, some way of monitoring this strategy to ensure that your project or your strategy is actually working. Or how to evaluate this strategy after a while. Maybe at the end of each phase, you have to actually evaluate your strategy and find out whether your strategy that you started with is actually working. So you must have some sort of monitoring and evaluation system, some sort of M&E system that you will use to monitor and evaluate your strategy. And then after the M&E system, the next thing is implementing the strategy. It's one thing having the strategic plan, and it's another thing implementing the strategy. And implementing the strategy, you need to have the right people who understand the strategy. And definitely, because you develop the strategy with your team, they are the best people to implement this strategy because they know the strategic thinking that went into the development of this strategy. As you start implementing the strategy, there will be things that will enable this strategy to work, and there will be disruptors. You just have to manage them as you go along. Thank you very much for listening. It's been wonderful having you. And I believe now you will look at your projects strategically instead of going into detailed planning too early. Start looking at the project environment and look for the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats or risk in this project environment. And come up with smart ways of mitigating these weaknesses or overcoming these weaknesses and mitigating this risk. Come up with smart ways of enhancing the strengths that you've identified and leveraging on the opportunities that you have identified in the project environment. And then once you have these smart ideas, that's what you develop into objectives and then outcomes. And then it is after that that you go into detailed planning of those outcomes. That is how it's going to be done, when, and how much, and so on. That's when you should start worrying about those things. So the planning of the project starts with developing a strategy. And it's very important that you get the strategy right. It's one of the causes of project failure, a project without a strategy. And people plan using templates. I'm sorry, you can't plan. Templates are just a tool, and they come in too early. You might use templates when you are doing detailed planning, but not at the strategy stage. Sometimes when you are doing even strategic project planning, you must involve some of the key stakeholders. It's not just you and your project team. You must involve the clients, some of strategic people within the client's organization. So it's always a collective effort. And it's a thinking process, and people will come up with ideas that will help you implement the project in a better manner. For instance, you are going to implement a project in which it's not a greenfield project. It's a brownfield project where the facility is already in existence and there's operations going on. Let's say a hospital, and the hospital is operating, and you've been asked to go and rehabilitate the hospital. You need to have a strategy so that you don't mess up the operations of the hospital. You need to go into the environment of the project, which is the hospital environment, and find out the constraints. There will be constraints on your time. There will be times you can work, times you cannot work. And you must have a strategy to overcome that constraint. There will be constraints on your movement, which came from the project environment. There are areas you can work now. There are areas you cannot work now. These are all constraints you identify from the project environment, and you must have a strategy as to how to handle it. That's what I'm talking about. And if you don't have this kind of thing and you start doing detailed planning, you are jumping the gun. So I came up with my own definition of what project management is about. A project management is about analyzing the project's internal, external environment to determine the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the project objectives, and crafting and implementing an agile project strategy or tactics that will overcome these weaknesses and threats and leverage on the strengths and opportunities to achieve the strategic objectives of the project. That is all that project management is about. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that the next time you are given a project, please take time off to develop a strategy before you go into detailed planning. Don't forget to visit me on my Facebook page, #GCCJBCC, or visit me on my YouTube channel, JB Nate, or attend some of my weekend courses where I'll go into detail into this strategic project planning with you. We might do some exercises for you to understand it better. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.